For your consideration, the Jericho.
Hey, how's it going, YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today in PubStomp MTG, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing the new Iron Man Titan of Innovation. And this commander I'm pretty excited about because I love Iron Man as a character in the comics and also in the MCU. This is going to be in the new Secret Lair product that is coming out tomorrow by the time of this recording, which is kind of scary because most likely this is going to be sold out within an hour or maybe even less depending on how well this does. And knowing how the new Secret Lair system works and knowing people are very hyped about Marvel, this is probably most likely going to get sold out before people could even buy the set, which is kind of sad because I wish this could be open for everybody, especially with a lot of work schedules. They might not be able to even buy this by the time that this comes out. And I feel like the general consensus is if you didn't get this product or if you don't want to pay that much money, proxying the cards is a very affordable option because scalpers will definitely jack up the prices by buying like 20 of these things and then selling the singles for a lot of money, and which is just honestly disgusting. I'm not a big fan of the whole scalping. So to me, I'm planning on buying one of each of these, putting them in different decks or making commanders themselves. For example, Iron Man, I do plan on building this in paper, and I also do have Wolverine in paper. I actually played it in MagicCon a little bit ago, which was absolutely a blast to play and honestly quite a menace. There's times where I was swinging like 20 damage by turn 5 with Wolverine, which is quite ridiculous. But this is not a video about Wolverine, this is a video about Iron Man. This is a great commander. This is essentially just a birthing pod in a commander by attack triggers, and there's a lot of things to discuss, and so let's get it started. So let's first discuss Iron Man and what he does. His mana cost is 3 blue and a red, so 5 total mana to cast him. He's a legendary artifact creature, human hero, and he does have flying and haste. He also has the ability Genius Industrialist. Whenever Iron Man attacks, create a treasure token, then you may sacrifice a non-creature artifact. If you do, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle, and he does have a 4/4 body. So like I previously mentioned, this is basically just a birthing pod when you attack with Iron Man. The big downside is you have to sacrifice a non-creature artifact, so you can't just sacrifice a Frogmere Enforcer to get an 8 CMC artifact onto the battlefield. You'd have to sacrifice a non-creature artifact, which luckily Iron Man does provide when he makes a treasure token. A treasure token simply has a 0 mana cost, so even if you sacrifice that treasure, you can search your library for a 1 CMC card like Soul Ring or Commander's Plate, which luckily is in the Secret Lair. So even though you have to sacrifice a non-creature artifact in order to search your library, you can search your library for any artifact, whether it's a creature or non-creature. So of course there are ways to build around it. I'll talk about that later in the video, but I just wanted to point that out. But now I want to discuss with you the most exciting thing about this deck besides playing Iron Man and Commander, and that's the fact that you could essentially play a secret commander with this deck because you could essentially just pod up into a artifact that you want to play. And for such a long time I've been wanting to play Simulacrum Synthesizer in a deck. I've been testing it here and there with different commanders like Brutaclad, making all your tokens into those constructs, swinging with a big giant mech army, which sounds pretty fun, but in all reality it's very hard to get Simulacrum Synthesizer on the battlefield. But now with Iron Man, we essentially have that tutor chain to get to it pretty quickly. All we have to do is sacrifice artifacts a couple times to get it onto the battlefield. And so if you are familiar with the movies or the comics, many of you may know about the Iron Legion. This is essentially just assembling it, because whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So essentially, little by little, if we're potting here and there, artifacts are going to be entering the battlefield, and most likely they're going to have a CMC greater than 3. So with that, we're constantly going to be making those constructs, and they're going to get bigger and bigger each time. And that's why I love about it. It's so flavorful with Iron Man, because of course he's trying to build a suit of armor around the world, and this is an absolute way to do that because we're going to be surrounding our opponents with big giant constructs. And so essentially, this is basically the goal of the entire deck, and how I wanted to build it is building around Simulacrum Synthesizer. And of course there are a lot of clone options that we can take advantage of, specifically with Simulacrum Synthesizer, where we could copy artifacts. For example, Phyrexian Metamorph, we could have it enter the battlefield as a copy of Simulacrum Synthesizer and also trigger it to make a construct. There are some cards that are similar to Phyrexian Metamorph, like Machine God's Effigy. This is great because you could essentially tap this for mana along the process of copying the Simulacrum Synthesizer. Another great option from the big score would be Worldwalker Helm. I like this because if you create one or more artifact tokens instead create those tokens plus an additional map token. And it does have an activated ability by 1 and a blue and tapping it. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. I personally like this better than some of the other options, mainly because this is a constant way we can make more artifact token copies of Simulacrum Synthesizer, and the more copies we do make, the more constructs we're going to be making in the process that we could be swinging at our opponents. There are also some other choices for clones, but I didn't want to dive too much into them because it's kind of redundant. Of course, I absolutely love Simulacrum Synthesizer, but we don't want to just rely on this card alone. We want to have other options to take advantage of in the deck where we either clone them or if we just get value out of them. Here's some other options for you. One card I think would be absolutely great in this deck is Kappa Cannoneer. This is another card I've wanted to put in a deck for quite a while, and I personally think that this works very well in the deck because it does have Improvise and it does have Ward 4. This is very hard to remove on the battlefield unless you have some board wipe. Whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Kappa Cannoneer and it can't be blocked this turn. So this is just a great way, essentially, if we have a lot of artifacts entering the battlefield, this will get bigger and could be a big giant threat that we could swing at our opponent's life total. Plus we do have a lot of those clones that we can use this for. We can make a lot of Kappa Cannoneers swing at our opponents, and essentially they will become unblockable most of the times when artifacts are entering the battlefield on our side. Another personal favorite of mine is Terror of the Peaks. I love this card so much, and this works perfectly with Simulacrum Synthesizer and a lot of other clone options, because the more you clone Terror of the Peaks, the more you can use its last ability. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So the more clones we do have Terror of the Peaks on the battlefield, the more we can spread around damage when more of those constructs enter the battlefield. Plus those constructs can get very huge, and I absolutely mean they're going to be massive. Sometimes I've seen it become 20/20s because I have like 20 of those on the battlefield. And so when they all enter the battlefield simultaneously with Terror of the Peaks, you could just blast somebody for even 20 damage like I mentioned previously. This is an absolutely disgusting card, especially if you can clone it more. This is going to end the game very quickly. And because there's going to be a lot of ETB shenanigans, I thought Displacerkin would be a perfect fit in the deck, because whenever you cast a non-creature spell, which most likely we are when we're casting a lot of those artifacts, we could exile up to one target non-land permanent we control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So that'll work perfectly with our ETB shenanigans with Terror of the Peaks. Or if we want to exile another artifact on the battlefield with CMC 3 or greater, we could put more constructs on the battlefield with Simulacrum Synthesizer. Because we can pot up to different artifacts, Panharmonicon is a great fit because it's an artifact itself, and it'll double the ETB triggers whether we're using with Terror of the Peaks or Simulacrum Synthesizer. We have that option of doubling those effects. And I will say I can't contain my excitement talking about these cards because a lot of these cards I absolutely cherish myself, like Simulacrum Synthesizer and Terror of the Peaks and cloning strategies, because the more I clone Terror of the Peaks, the more damage I'm going to be dealing. The same can be said for constructs. So either way, this is a win-win for me, and hopefully it is for you too. And we do want to make sure we could use Iron Man's ability to its fullest, and so I believe extra combats are going to be incredible in this deck, because not only are we going to be swinging with a big giant construct army, but we could constantly little by little pot up to bigger and bigger artifacts that we could place on the battlefield. You can take advantage of spells like the Great Train Heist, which is a great modal spell. It has that spray ability where you could choose any of those mana costs. You could get the extra combat with that first ability, the second ability. You could buff up your creatures and they give them first strike, and you can get some treasure generation when you deal combat damage to an opponent this turn. So all those options, if you could get those are worth it. Another card that's going to work very well is Hexplate Wallbreaker. If we have a 4 CMC artifact on the battlefield, we could basically sacrifice it with Iron Man, get this on the battlefield, and then equip it to Iron Man so that we could get that extra combat and pot even further on. Another versatile option, and that can be a game ender, is Savage Beating, because you give your creatures double strike, or you could get an additional combat phase, and using that Atonement ability, you can do both. I like this because we could use it with Iron Man, get that extra combat to put another artifact on the battlefield, and we could also use this with our big giant construct army. If we have a huge army, we could give them all double strike, get that extra combat, and swing in for some more. And most likely, opponents are not going to be surviving that turn later on. And I will say there is so many different versions of those extra combat cards. Those are just some of my personal favorites, but if you do want to get infinite combats, here's an option for you. A key part of this combo would be using Aggravated Assault. This is a great card to close out games. This is harder to get on the battlefield because it's not an artifact, it is an enchantment, and we can't tutor it with our commander. But either way, this is going to be a really good outlet for us to get infinite combats, because of course we could pay into that mana ability, untap all creatures you control. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Then you could use an artifact like Sword of Feast and Famine, where whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. So this essentially will untap all your lands, you pay into that mana ability to get the extra combat, and when you deal combat damage to a player, Sword of Feast and Famine will trigger again, and this will result infinitely or essentially when your opponents are dead. And because Iron Man does have flying, he does have some evasion, this is a great way to close out the game. Another card similar to the Sword of Feast of Famine is the Reaver Cleaver. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. And because Iron Man has a power and toughness of 4/4, he will get an additional +1/+1, and that's the lucky number with aggravated assault to make 5 treasure tokens, and you could essentially get infinite combats that way. I do want to emphasize this combo actually is pretty easy to assemble because the Reaver Cleaver or Sword of Feast and Famine are tutorable with our commander. All we need to do is sacrifice an artifact with 2 CMC, and we could get one of those to assemble the combo essentially, or get some value out of getting treasure or untapping all our lands. With all that said, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Iron Man Titan of Innovation. And this is one commander I am ecstatic about, and I can't wait to build it. And this is a deck I plan on building myself. I do have the deck list down below in the description if you do want to go check it out. I have about 80% of it built. I just need the Iron Man cards, and hopefully I could get my hands on the copy with a secret lair. So hopefully it does not sell out. But besides that point, let me know down below in the comments, how would you build around Iron Man? I know there's a lot of different ways to pot up to different artifacts. This is just one strategy that I plan on using myself. So if you can, make sure to check out my Patreon link down below in the description to help support the channel. There are other ways to support the channel by using my TCG Player affiliate link down below in the description if you want to pick up any of these singles that you saw today. But if anything else, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. That's definitely one of the best ways in supporting the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.